What's your default programming? We all have it. We all have a default operating system that we resort to, and that becomes the baseline for how we live our lives. Most men are running on a default program. They're mindlessly going through the motions. This can lead to mediocrity. This can lead to just good enough and just being average, and ultimately just going through the motions in life. As kingdom driven men, we are called to do it a different way. In today's show, we are going to look at how to change your default operating system. Now, the wisdom of this world has a method and they have a framework for how they do this. But as kingdom driven men, we do it a different way. Let's get into it. Hey guys, welcome to today's episode. I'm your host, Josh K. This is Raising the Standard Leadership, Mindset, and Development for the Kingdom Man. And today I want to talk about this concept of a default. We all have a default operating system. It is what we resort to and how we live our lives, how we go through our day-to-day routines, what kind of energy, what kind of purpose, what kind of power we show up with. And whether you realize it or not, you are running on a default, and that default can be good or it can be bad. So let me give you the definition of what I found as the problem that we need to address and what is the definition of a default. And the definition I found was a pre-selected option adopted by a computer program or mechanism when no alternative is specified by the user or the programmer. So think about that. It's where you go when you're just going through the motions. What is this default that you just tend to gravitate to? How do you make decisions? How do you go through your day? And what's that look like? And whatever the sum average is, that is your default. I have a default and you have a default. Most men today are running on a default program that's average. The baseline is low level. It leads to mediocrity. It's mundane. It's going through the motions day after day. There's no intention. There's no purpose. And there's no energy brought to it. We just sink to that lowest level of preparation, that lowest level that we always go to. And the world has an answer for this. And I want to talk to you about what they offer when it comes to the wisdom of the world, the frameworks, the coaching that's out there to break this default operating system that many guys live by. And the answer to this is mindfulness. It's the power of intention, being purposeful. You might have even heard of mindfulness training. It's now encroaching upon workplaces and organizations. If you've been following the show, you'll remember that last week we talked about the war of two wisdoms. And we learned there is a natural wisdom from below and there is a wisdom from above. And this natural wisdom can be very sincere. It could even be moral, and it can be logical to our natural mindset and way of thinking. Earthly wisdom can be good. And if you want to learn more about the war of two wisdoms, go back and listen to last week's episode. Now, remember, earthly wisdom can be good. And if we trace back the root of earthly and natural wisdom, we know it comes from eating from the wrong tree. In the Garden of Eden, Adam ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It had good in it. And with that good, we have a way that makes sense to us. There's a way that seems right to a man, but the destruction is death. And we know that not all good is God. Everything that appears to be good is not necessarily from God, even if it's moral, sincere, and has elements of truth wrapped within it. So how do we avoid good decisions and make God decisions? Well, the answer is changing our default operating system. And here's the question I have for you. Are you conditioned to making your own moves, your own choices, your own decisions, and living independently from God's will for your life? So guys, the answer to this problem is changing our default. So guys, I want to share something with you. I was spending some time with the Lord the other day, and I was just enjoying time in his presence, and I was directed to Proverbs chapter 3. And there was a verse that just was really highlighted to me, and it really appeared as a follow up to last week's episode, The War of Two Wisdoms. Because if we're talking about two wisdoms are available to us as men, there's a natural, earthly, logical wisdom from below, and then there's also a heavenly wisdom, a wisdom from above, an unearthly wisdom that we have access to. The question now becomes, how do we access it? How do we walk in this place where we're tapping in to wisdom from another realm and where we're choosing God over just what's good enough? Because the biggest challenge we have is we have this decision to make of, is it good or is it God? And these decisions can set the trajectory for our life. And so we have to approach them with really focusing on uncovering the will of God for our lives as individuals. So I want to share this verse that was highlighted to me from the book of Proverbs. And it's Proverbs chapter 3, verse 6. I'm going to read the verse to you. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. So, how do we break the cycle of default? How do we interrupt this lower level operating system that just kicks in and takes over, and we just end up going through motions? Let me tell you, it's more than mindfulness for the kingdom driven man. It's hidden in this verse through the word acknowledge. In all your ways, acknowledge him. So I did a word study on the word acknowledge because I wanted to really uncover, what does this mean? What can we get from it? And how do we practically, in an everyday sense, walk through our lives acknowledging God? Because that is a key here for him making our path straight and for us accessing heavenly wisdom. And this is what I found. It's used in a variety of senses. And here's a couple words that we can sub in for acknowledge. So remember, the verse is, in all your ways, acknowledge him. Well, it also has to do with being aware, cultivating this awareness of God in our everyday lives. So we could say, in all your ways, be aware of him. In all your ways, be acquainted with him. Advise with him, appoint with him, comprehend him, consider him. And I love this here. It says, be diligent, declare, discern, and discover. So think about that. In all your ways, declare the will of God. Be diligent to seek out the will of God. Be diligent to discern and to discover the will of God for your life. And as you do that, as you acknowledge him by doing those things, his promise is to make our paths straight. Okay, so let's get even more practical with this. I want to read you a note from a commentary which gave me incredible insight on this. And if we talk about in all your ways, acknowledge him, it talks about beginning. It's the beginning of your ways. It's not, I started something, I made a decision, and certainly God can help you. He can bring forgiveness and restoration if you made a wrong decision. But the key is to start. The key is to begin with him and his will for your life. And so we see begin, continue, and with every work, purpose, and plan with God. Now, here's the thing, guys. Self-sufficiency and self-confidence have been the ruin of mankind ever since the fall. Man's sin has been to live independently of God. And so when we talk about changing our default, it's breaking this spirit of independence. It's breaking this thing where the default in my life is where I can just make decisions because I think that's what I should do. So I'm just going to do it. And I don't stop to check with him, or it seems logical, or you break out the checklist, or you break out the matrix or the framework that you use to filter through your decisions in life. And the question for you and the question for me is, are we stopping to consider? Are we stopping to acknowledge? Are we stopping to seek, to declare, to discern, define, and discover the will of God for our lives? And if you're not doing those things, if you're not interrupting that pattern in your life and being intentional and purposeful, not just for the sake of being intentional, not just for the sake of being mindful, but for the sake of acknowledging the Lord's will and priority and placement in your life, then you are most likely running on default. Okay, so how do we break the cycle? How do we break the pattern? How do we rewire and create a new default operating system within us? So I found some keys. I want to make this practical and I want to share these with you. And I have two verses here, and they are two practical ways that we can acknowledge the Lord in everything we do. And it has to do with commitment. There's a verse that it says, commit your works to the Lord and your plans will be established. Proverbs 16:3. And then we also know, commit your way to the Lord, trust also in him, and he will do it. Psalm 37:5. So here we see commit your works and commit your way right from the beginning, not after you start, not after you make the decision, but right from the beginning. Prayerfully consider and then commit your works and commit your way for his glory. Now, the way I do this, and it's even the way this message that I'm sharing with you now is downloaded to me, is that I give the Lord the best part of the day. So I have a morning ritual, I have a sacred space, and on future episodes, I'm going to be sharing more about this morning routine, how you can tap in and how you can access what I call the unfair advantage. If you're interested in that, if you're looking for a new program or a way to connect with God that's deep, meaningful, practical, and you want to learn more about that, stay tuned to future episodes because I'm going to be sharing exactly what that looks like. But here's a key I want to give you right now. The Lord knows what you need before you ask. In fact, Jesus says that as he's teaching the disciples how to pray. So listen up to me here because this can kick in a default that's low level for us. And we can easily say, well, I don't have to ask. I don't have to pray about that. I can just make the decision. God knows. God knows that I need an answer to that. He knows what I need before I ask him. And we can use that as an excuse not to ask him because he knows everything and he knows our needs. However, there is a secret and there is an instruction from the Lord that despite the Father knowing what you need before you ask, we still are instructed to pray, to seek, to ask, and to knock. There's something about that that's extremely pleasing to the Lord. And what it does, it shows our dependence on Him. Because even though we know that He knows what we need, when we stop to ask, when we stop to say, Lord, I'm totally dependent on you. Father, I don't want to go without you. And when we say, Father, I don't want to go without you, it's showcasing our dependence. That, guys, it shows that we are weak in and of ourselves, in our flesh, in our own natural energy and strength, that we need Him, that we need the Lord, that we don't want to go alone. We are dependent, we are surrendered, we are yielded, and we're asking for Him to go with us. And there's something about that that attracts God into your life and where He can come in and He can bless your plans, He can establish your ways and make your path straight. And this is the biggest issue between the world's way and the world's definition of being a man and God's way and God's definition for the kingdom man. The world is independent. The world wants to do it on their own. The world wants to muster up enough energy, enough strength, enough willpower where it's driven by I can, I want, I will. And we see this I-centered, me-centered focus with the way of the world. You can do it. If you want it, you can have it. Where for us as kingdom men submitted to the way of the Lord, we are in a surrendered position to Him and we do what He calls us to do, and we are fully dependent on Him. Now, when He says go and when He reveals the battle plan, we go and we run forward and we do not flinch and we go in strength. We're more than conquerors. We're warriors. We take territory and we expand the kingdom. But there's this thing at the beginning. There's this stop and there's this pause where we acknowledge Him and we get direction and we submit our plans. And when He blesses and when He gives us the green light, we go after it. But that is the major difference. The world will have you run. The world will have you go. The world will have you be intentional, use purpose and focus. But if it's coming from that natural place, if it's coming from within your own soul, within your own willpower, then it's off. It's earthly wisdom. It's natural. It's earthy, and it can be demonic. So guys, I want to encourage you to acknowledge the Lord in everything you do. Acknowledge Him at the beginning of the day. Tell Him that you're dependent on Him. Tell Him you don't want to go unless He goes with you. Tell Him that you need Him, and this will attract the presence of God into your life. And guys, this is a relationship. This is what relationship looks like. I love my wife, but it's not enough for me to say, hey, I already told you that 17 years ago. I need to express that love. I want to talk to her. I want to have a relationship. I want to cultivate dialogue. And that's what the Lord wants from us too. He's interested in you. He wants to know you. He wants to have a conversation with you. He wants you to spend time with Him. And this is what relationship looks like. So guys, changing your default, if you haven't been living this way, if you haven't been intentional with stating your dependence upon God, if you haven't been showcasing those actions within your life, I'll tell you, we need to break some cycles. We need to break some habits because our natural default wiring has just kicked into living independently and making those decisions for ourselves, by ourselves, and without the Lord's wisdom. And this takes time to break. It will be developed over time, and it takes deliberate practice. It takes deliberate practice to be intentional about following and pursuing the will of God for your life. And there's a quote that I want to share with you, and it states this: we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. You need to be training each and every day. And I shared with you, I train with my morning routine, spending time in God's presence. I'll be sharing more about how I do that and how you can use some ancient techniques and some practices for you to develop, cultivate, and step into a greater dimension in your connection with God. And we'll be talking about that on future episodes. Stay tuned, stand strong, and let's raise the standard. Hey guys, I wrote a book that went on to become a bestseller. It's called The Standard: Discovering Jesus as the Standard for Masculinity. I would love for you to get this. It's available on Amazon right now. But if you visit standard59.com, you can get the first chapter of the book for free. I want to give you the chapter called Jesus Has a Plan. And you need a plan as well. There's specific areas in your life that you will be attacked in. How do I know? Because Jesus was attacked in these areas as well, and there's a pattern to it. And I want to give you this chapter so you can see how Jesus effectively deploys a plan in his life and how he sets the standard for all men to follow, and why we need a plan as well. If you want that chapter, go over to standard59.com and grab it. If you want to get the book, you can get the book on Amazon.com. Thanks for watching today's video, and if something resonated with you, please leave a comment below. Let us know what it was. Tell us what you would like us to explore for future episodes. Go ahead, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and continue to raise the standard.